I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week, we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. And as you may know, that in the last few weeks, we've been speaking about the rise in anti-Semitism here in the United States and across the world, both with the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee. And now a film called October 8th has been released that deals with that and traces it back to October 7th, 2023. That was the date that at 6:29 in the morning, a group of 3,000 Hamas terrorists crossed the border between Gaza and Israel, and they decided to wake everybody up and slaughter them. The civilians in Israel, some 3,000 terrorists, went to 22 communities in southern Israel and murdered 1,200 Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, kidnapped 251 people. And while they were at it, they also sent their people over to the Nova Music Festival that was also going on and included them in their rampage. And the number of people were kidnapped were 251, ranging in age from 9 months to 93 years old. By the way, Hamas live streamed its atrocities and even posted what they did on the victims' own Facebook page. Well, the next day, there was a demonstration in Times Square, New York. You would think that the people there were outraged and they were going to protest against what Hamas did. In fact, they did just the opposite. They celebrated what happened. And it wasn't just there, it happened on college campuses. One professor spoke of feeling exhilarated and energized by the massacre in Israel. And 34 student groups at Harvard University signed a letter saying that Israel was, quote, entirely responsible for the attack. With us today is a student at one of the schools that were featured in this film, Tessa Veksler. Thank you so much for joining me. You were the president of the student body at the time. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. When you first, now this was on Shabbos. You were asleep with everybody else. And when you heard about it, and when you awakened, what was your first thought?
Well, I had a similar experience to other Shabbat observant Jews in that I woke up not knowing what was happening. And it was very, clear to me the second that I woke up because two of my housemates were sitting across the room waiting for me to wake up, staring at me. And they said, that there's a war in Israel. And I said, well, there's always a war in Israel. And they told me that it was nothing that we've ever seen before. And so when I realized kind of the gravity of the situation and the videos that were coming out, I was in complete shock. And I think also the juxtaposition of this happening on Simchat Torah, which is, one of the happiest days, if not the happiest day of the year for the Jewish people, was very, very challenging.
Right. And so what did you do that day? Or did you talk to fellow students? What happened on campus?
So since it was over the weekend, I would say that, and because of the holiday, Jewish students were all kind of in the same spaces. We were all gathering together. We were talking about what was happening. Many of us had family, friends, people that we knew that were there. Many of us knew soldiers in the army. So we were, gearing up for the fact that the IDF was responding to this. And, essentially after kind of being logged off for 48 hours and then kind of grabbing your phone after an atrocity like this, it's a very overwhelming wave of emotions because I was seeing everything that people had been seeing over the past 48 hours that weren't observant, and I was absorbing it all at once. And so I think it really hit me like a tidal wave the second that I got my phone back. And so I kind of immediately went to social media to talk about it.
And you posted something.
I did. I made a post
Yes.
And it wasn't the first time that I'd posted about Israel. I've been very vocal about Israel on my social media since high school. But I made a post and I said, standing up for Jewish human rights is not a political statement, because the one thing that I did notice when I turned my phone back on was the fact that the only people that were talking about what was happening were Jews. And
And they were upset with what was happening?
well, the Jewish people, of course,
Yes.
was a tragedy, but
Okay.
for the non-Jewish people, I wanted them to understand that just because this was happening to Israelis, they were justifying it because of the political conflict around Israel. Non-Jews were saying, well, I can't talk about this. And so my post was really directed to people, to the non-Jewish community, saying that standing up for Jewish human rights is not political. And what just happened was the greatest massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And so I made my stance incredibly clear. I said, I stand with the Jewish people, I stand with Israel, and this is not a controversial statement whatsoever. And I guess, everything erupted basically after that. Before Israel had even responded, I was already getting hate mail. And I think I was, first of all, extremely surprised at people's reactions, because not necessarily surprised in the fact that, anti-Semitism has never been taken as seriously as it should be, but surprised that even something that was so horrific didn't even give us 24 hours of sympathy.
Well, let me ask you this. It's Shabbos now. You haven't turned on the radio. You're a Shabbos observer. Had you thought in your mind of, say, on Sunday, putting together a rally of the students on campus, we're with Israel, we're standing with Israel. It's something along those lines. Had that occurred to you?
We did all gather, and I would say it was more somber at this point, because we were still grieving at that point, I would say, before we realized. And again, I think for a lot of young Jews on college campuses, this was a different type of shock, because we had been experiencing anti-Semitism on college campuses in different forms, but especially at UCSB, where really the only time Israel came up on our campus as a discussion was for divestment resolution, or during apartheid week, as they called it at UCSB. And so for us, I think it was really shocking that, hold on a second, we're grieving right now. Israel hasn't even responded yet. So it wasn't even in our mind that we would need to fight for people to have sympathy for a massacre against us.
Well, tell me about USC. What last year, when we saw, particularly at Columbia, because that's my alma mater, and so I'm very familiar with it, and I watch what's going on over there. There were these demonstrations by these people wearing face masks and etc., demonstrating, seizing buildings, etc. And the same thing happened at your college?
Definitely. And I think
really, yeah.
And not to the same degree. I think that obviously Columbia is one of a kind. And at UCSB, I would say things emerged a bit differently, because at UCSB, they had a specific target, which was me. And the reason that I was a specific target is because they identified something that they could do to prove a point about their stance on Zionism. And it was by taking down someone in the most powerful leadership position in the school. And so I felt very quickly that a lot of it was very much directed toward me. Yes, the entire community was affected. There was a lot of hate on campus that was directed toward the entire Jewish community, but there was also a lot that was directed at one specific individual.
But what is it? When you got elected, you actually ran on a platform. Well, talk about that.
Right. So I was president of Students Supporting Israel when I ran for student body president. And so it certainly was not a secret. And actually, the person that I was running against was also a Jewish student, and he was endorsed by Students for Justice in Palestine. And so really, it was almost at the forefront of our election that I was, the more Zionist candidate. And so,
and I endorsed by SJP.
Yes, he was, unfortunately.
Now, explain who SJP is. You know, SJP. This is a
Yes.
group that's funded by the Muslim Brotherhood, which also funds Hamas. Hamas is the group that attacked Israel. And
Yeah.
right, so he's endorsed by SJP. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. And no, not at all. And also, I mean, in October 8th, I would say that this is kind of the centerpiece of the film, in that SJP is kind of no, they're not like an organization that is easy to, to hold accountable. And so as the film progresses, you kind of see that Hamas really is providing the marching orders for these students. And so at this point, that wasn't even, when I was running, my focus was on winning. I knew that the odds were stacked against me because I was a Zionist, and I could tell that the race, unfortunately, was quickly turning, not about the merits, not about the fact that I was in student government for 3 years and this guy had never even been to a student government meeting, like completely uninvolved student, to someone who's extremely qualified. But really what we're being judged on was who's a Zionist and who's less of a Zionist or who isn't a Zionist.
And they knew you had spent time in Israel, you studied in Israel,
Right.
and they knew all this, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah. It was something that was very clear. It was on my social media platforms. It was something that was it was never something that I hid during the election period, because I believe that I wanted to assume that role as everything that I was, which was that I was Jewish, I was a woman, I am observant, I am a Zionist. So all of those things needed to win the election, not just one piece of that. So I didn't, relinquish any part of my identity during that election. So, when I won, and, eventually, like, people were upset, obviously, that didn't vote for me, but it subsided very quickly. And
And
over
did you win substantial? Was it a
No.
substantial win? How close?
No.
How close?
Very close, within about 100 votes.
Oh,
The university has 24,000 students.
of
So
whom how many are Jewish? What percentage?
12%.
12%.
The last that I heard, it could be different
Right.
now.
Okay.
And so over the summer, I was working already in my role, and I was organizing a conference for student government. I was doing interviews about what my plans were for the year, and I was getting a very positive reaction, and I was actually building a lot of coalitions between myself, between Jewish student groups and non-Jewish student groups. And I remember when school started, which for me, my first class was on October 2nd. I was so excited about what this year held. I felt like we got over the hump of people being so obsessed with the fact that I was a Zionist, and now I can actually do my job, and I can be known for the fact that I'm going to be the best, like, student body president that the school has ever seen. And very quickly, that right was taken away from me, because when you spend so much time fighting for the right to maintain your position, it's difficult to also excel in the role that you're in.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back now, October 8th. As we see in the film, October 8th, demonstrations broke out on college campuses, not just in Times Square and the situation at Harvard, but it all organized by SJP. They in fact, they had, as the film pointed out, they had a toolkit all ready to go about how to deal with the demonstrations and what to do, etc.
Right.
And SJP at your school was right up there.
I think that October 8th was not the day that I was really aware of any of this, again, because I was still, like, I was not plugged in as much to that. And also, UCSB was generally a calmer campus comparatively to other UCs, and compared obviously to the Ivy Leagues. And so even though there were marches in place, and all of the things that you're saying are completely true for most campuses, I think that for me, I was so taken aback by the immediate hate against me and the threats that I was receiving, that I don't know, I really went to, like, a very different place, and I wasn't as I was very aware of what the Jewish community was experiencing though, and what was happening on campus, but it was all a very overwhelming time.
Talk to me about those threats. They were physical threats, and they made it known not just to you, but they went to the student. There was a building on campus that they talked about that.
Right. So my office was located in the Multicultural Center, and this was already in February, and I hadn't said anything publicly at this point about what I was going through on campus. And this was already, set a while after October 7th, and I had been getting harassed every single day, like on social media, in person, just constant, constant, constant. And in February, I got messages on my phone and people were sending around that there was a sign in the building that said no Zionists allowed, and that they were organizing a sit-in the Multicultural Center because they wanted to make a point that the Multicultural Center was built on values that conflict with Zionism, and therefore Zionists should not be allowed. And the Jewish community mobilized pretty quickly, and they said, well, we're not going to let anybody push us out of a space that we pay tuition dollars to use. And again, ironically, it is the Multicultural Center, and no culture can be forced out. And so, the Jewish students, they came and they sat and they did their homework, and the people that were protesting sat in the same room, and they were all in the same room for a very long time. And by the time that I got there, and that now infamous photo that I took with my dog tag standing in front of the Zionist not allowed, I I took that honestly, not even realizing kind of the impact that it would have, and the photo that ended up going viral that you see, like, on all these articles about October 8th, that picture is used because it really is shocking to see a sign like this, because it takes you back to a completely different time, which I would argue, Wendy Sachs, the director of this film, she says this a lot, that Zionists not allowed is Jews not allowed. And to read something like that on a college campus was shocking.
Here in New York, extensive media coverage. Television was all over it. What was going on out there? And how did the media treat you?
Depends what media. I
Television.
think
Everybody sees television. How did television treat you?
so. When all of this kind of emerged, there was a lot of coverage about it, and I think generally speaking, it was represented for what it was. That this sign was there, that it wasn't appropriate, that I was being attacked, and that I was the one being called out because my full name was on the posters that were inside the Multicultural Center receiving direct threats. So I would say that the reporting on it was very much like, this is the situation. However, we also have on a micro level, but for students, which is the most important thing, because there's no escaping your student body. When you're on a college campus, that is your world. Your world is your campus and the local community. And our student newspapers were very, I would say, harsh on me. And I think, again, that comes from the bias that I was a Zionist, and many students on our campus disagreed with a Zionist being in my position.
What did the newspapers? What did they say? They were harsh on you in what sense? What did they say?
I think that so the main focus and the main reason that people were upset was that they said that I was sharing my political opinions through my position, not as a student, not the fact that I was a Jew. They were trying to, and my argument back was, well, I'm sorry, but you wouldn't tell any other person, sorry, remove your ethnic and national origin and your religion away from this role. And so a lot of what the newspapers were talking about is Tessa's being treated as if she's a politician and a public figure. And that was, when people started leading this recall election to try to remove me, my argument against it was, first and foremost, I'm a student, and there's a dangerous double standard that's being placed on me that wouldn't be placed on any other student in my shoes.
Yeah, and what happened when they actually did vote? They actually did have a recall.
Did. So the way that it worked on our campus is that there is a specific process, and that process is first a petition that needs to reach a certain percentage of signatures and has to be signed by a specific group of people. And that reached the amount that was
The
needed,
threshold,
like
yes.
above that threshold. So the first step, which was already a problem in and of itself, because when I was speaking to administration, I was saying you shouldn't be allowing this petition to happen because the petition has no validity. The petition violates our university policies. They can't remove me based on my identity because that would violate Title VI. But the argument again that this wasn't a part of my identity, that this was a political perspective. And
They
so
said free speech, didn't they? They said to you it's free speech.
right, exactly. Free speech, and also the excuse that administration kept using was you are a public figure. And I said, I am a student. Because first and foremost, no matter what leadership role you have on campus, you are a student. And then after the petition had gotten enough signatures, the Senate, which consists of, I believe it was 26 or 27 senators, they get to discuss and decide whether or not they would like to approve this petition and move into a recall vote where the entire university has the opportunity to vote on my removal. What's interesting about this meeting that took place, first of all, there was hundreds of students, um, and I was nervous, of course, to walk into a situation where I knew that it was going to be one student going up, one after the other, talking about me, and obviously in a very negative and hurtful way. And I was waiting outside to enter this meeting. And as I'm waiting to enter, I hear like a bunch of voices behind me. And I turn around and I see people coming toward me with signs, and I've never seen these people before. And I know my Jewish community very well. And it just so happened that on the same day as they were voting on my recall election, they had also brought several survivors of October 7th to our campus for an event. And so the survivors made posters for me that said like, go Tessa. And they were like, we're here to sit in on your meeting. And I looked at them and I just was like, you need to leave right now. This is something that you do not want to sit through. You do not want to witness what these people are about to say. And they looked at me and they said, if you're doing this for us, then we're going to do this for you. And so I actually sat in between two survivors of October 7th throughout the entirety of the in-person portion of that meeting before it was moved online. So I felt, you know, it made me realize this is exactly why I'm doing this, that even this 6 hour long meeting is worth it. And the vote took place very late at night at 1 in the morning. We were all watching on Zoom within Hillel. They had opened up the space, and a lot of my friends were there, and we were sitting in anticipation. And eventually the vote happened, and it failed by one by one.
And it's all recorded on October 8th, the movie. Uh,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
Film.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. So, did the film surprise you in any way? I mean, you were living through it at the time, but were there surprises?
Absolutely. I think that I knew that it was going to be excellent because I could see the people that were being interviewed, and I just from meeting Wendy once, you know that she is just so incredibly driven, and she was putting every ounce of her being into this film. And so I saw it for the first time at its premiere. And when I saw it, I first of all was very emotional watching back my experience um, through Wendy's eyes. I think it was really difficult, and it still is. I've seen the film many times, and I love watching people see it for the first time. And for me, every time I see, the things that I had went through unfold, it's really challenging. And I think for me, the thing that I had not known that's included in the film is how long this has actually been brewing within our country. There's a specific meeting that's discussed um, that happened in 1993 between different Hamas leaders, and they were really describing what they had now accomplished, which was making this movement palatable for American college students. And we failed to prevent that from happening. And I think that was the biggest shock for me, that it was one thing I didn't know. It made a lot of sense. But the fact that they were able to kind of trace this sequence of events felt validating for me, that this was not something that started post October 7th. It was something that was brewing for a very long time, and now we have a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't happen anymore.
The movie also points out one particular incident about a bombing quote at a hospital,
Yes.
and the headline in the New York Times, the first headline was Israel strike is Israel, or I guess that's Israeli strike kills hundreds. And then when Israel said, we're not sure, we're looking into this, we don't know if this is really us, a new headline was, 500 dead in strike, right? At least 500 dead in strike. And then when it was discovered that Israel had nothing to do with it, it was actually a recording of two of the Palestinians who were involved in this, and that it was not Israel at all. The headline was at least 500 dead in blast. And then the New York Times, which was the paper I once wrote for and wrote a column in, simply said, well, we made a mistake. So it wasn't just on college campuses, but we had issues along the way elsewhere too. And I say the interview, the film interviewed a number of people, including Deborah Messing, who's an executive producer. She's the actress, but some political people, Richie Torres and the Senator Gillibrand, Kristen Gillibrand of New York, and some others. And so she tried to really cover the whole landscape and show really what happened in the aftermath of this horrific situation in Israel. And yours was a particular poignant moment in the movie about what happened to you, and then the vote at the end. So I thank you so much for joining us this half hour. Tessa Veksler, thank you very much, from California. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
My name is Stewart Ain. Until next week, have a good one.